All right. Wow, how do you follow the rock that rolled away? Man. Well, last week what we talked about was the way of the cross. This Sunday, we're talking about the way from the tomb. And in that, we're talking about what happened nearly 2,000 years ago, this Sunday morning, when Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And I know that when I was a kid, there was a song that we sang in a hymn. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along the narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. And if you ask me how I know he lives within my heart. And I love that song, and I love the idea that Christ's alive, walking with me. But there's a little part at the end that I just wanted to make sure. It kind of bugged me a little bit as a kid, and it bugs me a little bit now because I teach middle schoolers at a private school, and we're right at that moment where everything lined up with history and Bible, and so we're talking about the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, and they have all kinds of questions. And I'm always amazed at what middle schoolers think adults are saying. And so I just want to clarify, when we say Jesus lives within my heart, it's not like when your mom and dad are talking about your great Aunt Gladys who died, and you're going to keep the memory of her life alive in your heart. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what Christianity is talking about when we say Jesus is alive and he sends his Spirit to dwell in your heart. We're not celebrating a memory of Jesus, and we're gonna keep it alive, that memory alive forever. We're gonna work hard, and today we're working hard at remembering. No, Jesus Christ physically resurrected from the dead. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about that resurrection day, and those who witnessed on this very day, who encountered Jesus. The list starts out with Peter in 1 Corinthians 15, and goes on to say that later, by Sunday evening, Jesus had spoke with all the remaining 11 disciples. And then later, at another point, during a period of 40 days, Jesus met and spoke with all of his followers. And at one time, over 500 people at once. So it wasn't also that Jesus resurrected by spirit. He resurrected bodily. When he showed up with the disciples and the 11 of them, he said, "Look, touch my hands, see." A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones, and maybe he did a little flex when he did that, but he said, touch me, this is real. And then 500 people seeing him at once. That wasn't a bunch of people hallucinating the same thing at once. That's impossible. 500 people can't hallucinate the same thing at once. That just doesn't work. So Jesus really resurrected bodily. He was dead, and then his heart started beating again, and all the cells in his body, blood was flowing, neurons in the brain firing, and he came to life. And yes, it was a different resurrected type body because, he was doing that whole cloaking, these guys can't recognize him, now they do, and then he disappears, and then he shows up in a room. So, there was something different about that glorified, resurrected body, but it was still a body. And when he was there with the disciples, he said, "You got something to eat?" And they said, "Yeah, here's some fish." Swallowed it down. So I'm talking about a real resurrection. I'm not talking about keeping a memory alive. All right? So that's what Christianity is also talking about. And so what I want to look at is John 20, and I want to look at some of the one-on-one conversations that Jesus had after his resurrection. Because I believe that Jesus calls his sheep by their name, John 10, and that he wants to call you by name, and that he's coming for a one-on-one with you, the resurrected Jesus. And he's wanting to lead you from the tomb. He wants you to lead you from the tomb. So, John 20, the first thing that we hear is about Mary Magdalene. Now, why wasn't that in the list in 1 Corinthians? Well, back in the day, when you were trying to establish the testimony, you didn't use the testimony of a woman. Sorry, ladies, that's the way it was back then. They said you got to have 2 witnesses. They need to be men. And like if there was a woman testifying, nobody would believe her until a man stood and said, yeah, what she's saying is true. And they're like, oh, yeah. And I know that's horrible. And it's like, ugh, I hate that. And well, thank God for more fairness and justice today. But that's the way it was. So it wasn't listed in that testimony. But when we read the Gospels, and this is what the amazing thing is that it was a woman who was the first to see Jesus. And because of that, we know the gospel account is true, because no one who was trying to establish the authenticity of the resurrection would use a woman's testimony. But the first person that Jesus appears to after his resurrection is Mary Magdalene. I don't know if you remember Mary, but she was the woman who is said to have had 7 demons cast out of her. And she was also known to be a woman who was maybe tasted of the world, was considered a sinful woman. At least when she went to Simon the Pharisee's house, well, she wasn't invited to Simon's house, but she crashed a party where Jesus was there. And she shows up, and Jesus is reclining at the table, and she goes up to his feet and begins weeping at his feet. And her tears fall on his feet, and so she takes her hair and she wipes the tears away. And Simon, the Pharisee, goes, he's thinking in his head, he doesn't say it out loud, but he says, if this guy was really a prophet, he would know this woman is a sinful woman and wouldn't want anything to do with her. And then Jesus says, Simon, let me ask you a question. Here's a little story. There was a guy who owed $500, and then there was a guy who owed $500,000. And the master that they owed it to said, your debts are forgiven. And he said, which one probably loved his master more? And he said, well, the one with the $500,000. He probably, because he was forgiven more. And Jesus said, yeah, you answer right. The one who's forgiven more loves more. This woman has loved me more than you have. You didn't wash my feet when I came in, which is customary for guests at a dinner. But instead, this woman came and washed my feet for me. And so I remember struggling with that as a kid, thinking about that story, going, well, you know, I grew up in a kind of a Christian home, or culturally Christian home, and didn't do a lot of bad things. And so I was kind of like, well, that's not fair, Jesus. I haven't sinned a lot. So does that mean I don't love you as much? And then Jesus was like, gotcha. Guess what? We're all the ones who owe $500,000. We're all the big sinners. You think you just sinned a little, but that's not the truth. So that's the story of Mary Magdalene. Sorry, I went on a little tangent there. But with Mary Magdalene, just remember, she was the woman who was crying at Jesus' feet and wiped the tears away from his feet. So anyway, here she is. A woman who's experienced the forgiveness of Christ, was welcomed into the community of disciples and followed Jesus along with some other women. And they would take care of Jesus and the disciples' needs. They would help, oh, you guys are going to be over here? Okay, we'll gather a potluck dinner over here for you. We'll get the ladies in town to bring some food out. They would do that kind of thing. And so she was one of the followers. She experienced community like she hadn't before. She experienced acceptance like she had before because, well, I mean, she was weird. She was filled with demons before. She was a sinful woman. And now that had all been erased. It had been forgiven because of Jesus. But then Jesus is crucified. And it seems like all that is now buried in a tomb. The forgiveness has been buried. Is she ever going to experience that again? What's happened to the community where she was accepted and welcomed? They've all scattered. They're hiding in a room somewhere behind locked doors. What is that still going to be there? Is she going to have that family that she once had with Jesus and his disciples? So it seems like as Mary is going to the tomb Sunday morning, she's going to anoint a dead body, not a living person. That's what she thinks she's going to do. And of course, yeah, like Sherry said, who's going to roll the rock away? Who's going to roll that big stone away was one of the concerns. She gets there and the stone is rolled away. And she peers in and there's angels there saying, why are you looking for the living among the dead? And there's a shock and a not understanding what's going on. She sees the place where his body should have been. She sees the cloths that are usually wrapped around the body there on the stone. And she's going, what? I can't understand. I don't get it. Where is he? And she's crying. And then it's at that moment that Jesus appears. And he says, woman, why are you crying? It's just, they've taken him away. They've taken him away. Not risen. They've taken him away. So she still can't hear the angel's words just yet. It's like she's staring. She's staring at the gospel message, and it just isn't penetrating her. It hasn't gotten through. But then, thinking it was the gardener, I don't know if she had so many tears in her eyes and she's looking and she can't see who it is, or if it was that whole thing, Jesus is kind of cloaking himself, he can't see who it is. I don't know what it was. But she thinks it's the gardener. She goes, well, if you've taken him somewhere and put him, please tell me where he is. And then Jesus says, Mary. Mary. He says her name. And all of a sudden, everything in her registers. Everything goes, it's you, teacher, Rabboni. And she falls down at his feet and begins crying some more. And if you want to remember who Mary Magdalene is and tell her apart from the other Marys, she's always the woman at Jesus' feet. She's always the woman crying at Jesus' feet. And again, she's there clasping his feet, anointing his body, the living body of Jesus Christ, with her tears. And it's at that moment, Jesus says some amazing words to her. He says, go to my brothers and tell them that I'm alive and I will meet them in Galilee. Tell them. And he says this, I'm returning to my Father and your Father. Up to that point, Jesus has called his disciples servants. He called them disciples. He called them even friends in the Last Supper. But he had never called them brothers till up to this point. And there's something that's changed in this moment, that the cross has happened and the resurrection he's defeated death. It's now the adoption is official. The adoption is official. Mary, you are a part of the family. You, not just my father, but your father now. And my brothers and your brothers. Mary, the family has not disappeared. The family is not gone. The forgiveness is still here. It's real, Mary. And it's going to be forever. Because I have not risen just for a few years or a few days. I've risen to reign eternally. That's what Jesus has done. And so Mary was led away from the tomb with a new hope, a new family, and a trust that the forgiveness was there for her. The community that she had been accepted into is now there forever. So Mary, she goes on, she tells the disciples still don't believe. They still don't believe. They're still scratching their heads. Peter and John have run out to the tomb. They look and they see the cloth, and Peter walks away scratching his head. And at some point during this day, before the evening, Jesus has a one-on-one with Peter. Now, it's not recorded in scriptures. We just know in 1 Corinthians 15 it says, and the Lord met with Peter. And so there's some sort of conversations that has happened. But then there's another one-on-one, or I guess you should say one-on-two. There's two guys going to Emmaus. Now, here's another encouraging thing. These two guys, one of them remains unnamed. We don't know what disciple it was. The other one is Cleopas. And you're going, Cleopas? Which of the 12 was that? I never heard his name in the list. Well, there were other followers of Jesus, other faithful disciples. Cleopas was one of them. And so, our names aren't listed there in the Bible either. But just know that Jesus sees and knows and cares, because on this day, after his resurrection, before he appears to the remaining 11 apostles, he decides to hang out with Cleopas. And so Cleopas and this other disciple, they're on their way to Emmaus. Okay, now I'm jumping out of John here. Sorry, I'll come back to John in just a second. But I just a second again to say that Jesus, he's having some one-on-one meetings with people, okay? That's what I'm trying to get at. So he's on the road, they're talking, and Jesus comes up behind them as a traveler in disguise, and they don't recognize him. And he says, what are you talking about? And they're like, don't you know what's been happening in Jerusalem and everything? And they look down. It says they look down and they're downcast. And they said, we had hoped that this man was going to be the Messiah and restore Israel. And then Jesus goes, you all are so foolish. Don't you know the scriptures? And as they continue to walk towards Emmaus, he goes from Moses all the way through the prophets and the Psalms, and he says, here's what it says about the Messiah, and he's going to suffer, he's going to die, and he's going to be resurrected. And by the time they get to their hotel, to their Quality Inn, they're ready to eat, and they say, Jesus, well, they don't know it's Jesus, but please, whoever you are, come in, sit with us and talk with us and have a meal with us. Don't go on, it's late. And so Jesus does, and they sit down, they're getting ready to have a meal, and Jesus does the honors, and he breaks bread. And as soon as he breaks the bread, their eyes are open. They recognize it's Jesus. And boom, and all of a sudden Jesus disappears and he does this teleporting thing. And so they are so excited out of their skulls that they're going, weren't our hearts burning with fire when we were talking with them on the way? And so they're so excited, they cancel their reservations at the hotel and they run all the way back to Jerusalem that night, which is about 7 miles from Emmaus to Jerusalem. So they run back and they get back. They show up in the locked room where the remaining disciples are, and they say, it's true. What the women said are true. We've seen him. He's alive. And then they're like, yeah, he showed up to Peter too. And then while they're talking, Jesus shows up in the room. Locked doors and all. He shows up in the room and he says, look, not a ghost. Flesh and bones here. I'm resurrected. I'm alive. It's true. And now there was one person missing from the 11, Thomas. Now this is in John 20. I'm back in John 20 if you want to look. And so Jesus has a little special meeting that he's got to have with Mr. Thomas. Now Thomas, you know, he's got that name, right? What's in front of Thomas? Doubting Thomas. It's kind of a bad rap, isn't it? I mean, because the other disciples were doubting just as much, weren't they? Oh, this doesn't have a little thing to tighten it, so I'm lost cause here. All right. So anyway, Thomas, doubting Thomas.
None of them do that.
Oh, none of them work. All right, great. All right, new equipment coming. All right, so Thomas, he gets this bad rap, but I kind of feel for him because the other disciples were doubting too. They weren't believing when the ladies came up and said, hey, we saw him at the tomb. Jesus is alive. And so I go, why doubting Thomas? And well, I think it has something to do with the words that he said. He said, I will not believe. I will not believe until I see the scars in his hands and the wound in his side, and I put my hand in it. And so I think there was something about this that kind of sealed up his fate as doubting Thomas. But I just want to say the other guys were doubting just as much. And I also want to say skepticism. I mean, did you know that his other name, besides Thomas, was Didymus? And we're told that Didymus in Greek means twin. Now, I don't know about you, if you know anything about twins. I mean, why do they call him twin? Was it because maybe one of the other disciples kind of looked like him and they confused the two? Or maybe he had a twin brother. And if you know anything about twin boys, I mean, they're going to have some fun with that when they're younger, right? You're going to switch it up, kind of fool people. And it's going to happen naturally. You're going to get mistaken for the other brother and get called something else. So why wouldn't Thomas go, hey, you know what? I'm a little bit skeptical. Maybe you saw someone that looked like Jesus. I mean, it happens to me all the time, you know? So it could have been that kind of story. But there was his statement. He said, I will not believe until I touch the wounds in his hands and put my hand in his side. And then Jesus shows up in the room the next Sunday. So this is a week later after today, after Resurrection Sunday, shows up in the room a week later. And Thomas is there. And Jesus goes right up to him, says, Thomas, touch my hands. You asked for it, here it is. Put your hand in my side. Right there, bud. It's real. And he says, stop doubting and believe. Stop doubting and believe. And then he goes on to say, you believe because you saw, but blessed are those who believe without seeing. Guess what? That blessing is on you guys today. Have you seen Jesus? I haven't seen him physically. I mean, I've pictured him in my mind's eye. I've seen him in other people, working through other people, but I haven't seen him physically. But I believe, guess what? You have too. And so that blessing that Jesus spoke is on you today. You are blessed because you believe and have not seen. A blessing that's carried on for 2020 some years. Well, Thomas, his response is quite significant. When Jesus does that, you know what he says? He says, my Lord, my God. And he falls down and he worships. You know, Thomas was probably similar to the guys on the road to Emmaus. You know, we had hoped that this Messiah would redeem Israel, that he would free us from the Roman Empire and restore our nation. You know, restore the nation and make it like it was in the time of David. And this Messiah is going to be like David, right? I mean, he's going to conquer, and we're going to have a kingdom all the way from the Euphrates River to the Mediterranean, from northern Syria all the way to Egypt. And it's going to be awesome, you know? I'm sure that's what a lot of the guys thought. And then Jesus died. And then Thomas, when he is confronted by Jesus, says, my Lord, my God. My God is a significant thing. He's saying that to what he thought was once just a man. A lot of people thought that the Messiah was just a man like King David, a blessed man, a special man, a chosen man, but a man nonetheless. But Jesus was the God-man, God in flesh. And Thomas recognizes that now. And that his belief had been too small. His belief had been only in restoring a nation to its greatness, not in the oppression of sin, death, shame, and guilt from an individual's heart. Many individuals. And so something changed in that moment for Thomas. And Thomas was led away from the tomb. And the way from the tomb for him was to surrender that too small of a belief into a bigger belief, into not just a Messiah, an earthly Messiah, but a heavenly Savior, the Son of God, who came to save the world, not just a nation. And so things changed with that one-on-one encounter with Thomas. There's one more encounter that I want to take you back to, and again, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump out of John 20. I'm going to go back to John 11 and go back in time. But there was a moment when Jesus was going on his way to Bethany, and he gets word that his friend Lazarus is sick, and it's a sickness that looks like he's going to die from. And so messengers, tell him, hurry, get to Bethany. But Jesus doesn't seem to be in a hurry. And, he's friends with Lazarus, friends with Martha and Mary, his sisters. And by the time Jesus gets there, it's DOA. He's dead on arrival. He's been in the tomb for 4 days. Lazarus has. And so he comes, and Martha, one of the oldest sister, runs out to meet him before he gets to the place. And Martha says, where were you? If you would have been here, he wouldn't have died. And you can hear the disappointment. And the disappointment in Jesus, an expectation that wasn't met. And then she says the right thing. She says a correct thing. She says, well, I know even now God will give you whatever you ask. And then Jesus says, well, Lazarus is going to rise again. And then Mary, she goes to this thing where she does this kind of right answer thing again. She goes, well, yeah, I know he's going to raise on the last day, when on the day of resurrection. I know that he'll resurrect on that last day. Yeah. She gives that another right answer. And then Jesus says this in verse 25 of chapter 11. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? He said to Martha. And then she gives another right answer. It's a good one. It's very correct. It's even more correct than probably a lot of the other disciples. She says, I know you are the Messiah and the Son of God who was prophesied to come. So she recognized him more than just an earthly Messiah. She recognized him as the Son of God. Well, Jesus goes, he says, move the stone away. There's some people who are objecting to that, saying he's been dead 4 days. No, don't do that. And then he calls out in a loud voice, Lazarus! And Lazarus, lo and behold, is trying to get out. And he's all wrapped up in these grave clothes. And so I don't know if he's kind of like hopping out or what. But he gets to the mouth of the tomb where everybody's like, whoa, he's alive. And then Jesus says, hey, help him take off the grave clothes. And there's at that moment where I think Martha realizes that Jesus had a resurrection that wasn't for the last day. He had a resurrection that was for today. You know, the right answer is, yeah, all of us here. You know, one day there's going to be the resurrection day and we're going to resurrect. The answer our hearts maybe hope for is maybe there's some other thing that we hope will resurrect and come to life. And maybe Jesus will do that today. For Martha, he did. He let her know that the resurrection is just not some distant thing in the future, but it's for today. And that the resurrection, that he had it there for her. Well, in all these encounters, in all these individual one-on-one meetings, I hope you see and you hear Jesus calling his sheep by name. And I want you to know that Jesus knows your name too. And that he wants, and he is, and he will call your name and speak to you. And you don't have to sit there and stare dumbfounded at the story of the life, death, and resurrection. But that when you hear his voice, there can be an instant recognition that everything that Jesus spoke of is not just for those people out there, but it's for you too. That forgiveness and grace just isn't for those people out there, but it's for you too. That resurrection life just isn't for those people out there, but for you too. Jesus is going to call your name. I know that it might mean letting go of some things. It might mean letting go of condemnation, like Mary Magdalene had to let go of. To let go and remember that the forgiveness Christ gave is here for eternity. That family is here forever. That the community hasn't disappeared. That acceptance is here in the family of God. Maybe it's letting go of skepticism. Yeah. Maybe it's letting go of too small of a belief. Maybe your hopes has been in a nation being revived instead of God reviving individuals within a nation. Maybe it's despair. Maybe it's disbelief. But Jesus wants to call you away from that death, from that tomb, and lead you to resurrection life. Maybe it's more than letting go. Maybe there's some things that need to be removed out of your life so that you can experience resurrection life today, so you can hear him calling your name. You know, it's interesting, Lazarus was all wrapped up, and we talk about, we've been given this new life, and we take off the old life, the new self and the old self, and you take off and leave behind the sin like dirty clothing, and you put on the new that's been given to you, this new life, like clothing. You put it on every day. But Lazarus, he couldn't pull it all off by himself. He couldn't get the death off. Had to have some help. Do you ever think about that? I mean, I know that I probably usually think about the things in my life, my bad habits or my things about my character that need to change and I hope would need to be put off and put on the new and the Spirit of God working things in me. And I think of it more of a very individual, personal thing between me and Jesus. But did you ever think that the Lord brought the body around you to help you pull off some of those old ways and old things? You know, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, the fruits of the Spirit. It's hard to do those things all by yourself, to display those things all by yourself. You know, if I lived on a deserted island, man, I would be an awesome Christian. But you know what? I'm not. I live among people. I have a family. I'm surrounded by people. And relationships aren't always easy. And sometimes I do stupid things. I say stupid things. Sometimes other people say mean things or say things they don't mean. And there's misunderstandings and there's forgiveness that needs to be given, forgiveness received. And there's all of a sudden these fruits come into play with other people. Patience. Oh, that's what that's for. It's for these relationships. Oh, kindness. That's what I'm supposed to put it on right now. Oh, it makes sense. Yeah, maybe the Lord has surrounded you with a group of people to help you walk away from death, to walk away from the tomb by pulling off those grave clothes. Well, so there's letting go, there's removing, and maybe there's walking, just walking in this new life. You know, I think about the two on the road to Emmaus. You know, they ate with Jesus. Broken hearts mended by broken bread. And I wonder, sometimes we just need to pause, have a moment just to have a face-to-face with Jesus. I know sometimes maybe there's a little nervousness about slowing down our lives to have a little one-on-one with Jesus, to break bread with Him. We're nervous about what He might say to us or what He might point out. I think there's sometimes we think it's going to be the finger in our face. But I want to tell you that if Jesus were here and He was going to have a face-to-face with you, knee to knee, just like this, that He would tell you, I love you. I love you. And I think about you all the time. He would say that. And I know it's true. Psalm 139. How precious are your thoughts concerning me, Lord. If I were to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sands. I'm just thinking about the Atlantic coast and how many grains of sand are there on the Atlantic coast. That's a lot. How many thoughts He has concerning you outnumber the grains of sand. Wow. Jesus not only loves you, He likes you. He likes you. And I know for some of you, that's good news. Because you're kind of like, you know, my mama says that she loves me, but I know she has to say that. And sometimes I think you think the Lord is your mama. And that He has to say it because He's the Lord. That He loves you. But I want you to know, He likes you too. And if He was going knee to knee, face to face, He'd say, I like you. He said, don't worry about the stuff that needs to be changed. Just come here. Let's get knee to knee. And He wants to put His arm around you and said, don't worry about what's in here. I'll take care of that. I'll clean it up. You don't have to clean it up. You can't clean it up. Come close to me. That's the accomplishment of the cross and the resurrection and the new relationship that Jesus can have with us, that He now calls us brothers and sisters. And He says, now it's not just the Father, but your Father. You've been brought in. You've been adopted. You're a part of the family now because of the resurrection, and it's changed everything. So, today, Jesus has resurrected, and He's coming to have a one-on-one with you. He calls the sheep by name. And He's going to lead you away from the tomb to resurrect your life. And resurrect those parts that maybe you thought, that's just for the last day. The last day resurrection. But I think He wants to bring some hope to some things now. Maybe it's a relationship that you think is dead on arrival. But He's going to call out a name. It's going to come back to life. Maybe you think it's some relationships with people that are just languishing, but He can bring life that makes them flourish. And maybe there's hope that can be revived like a stone rolled away. So, what I'm praying is that you'll hear His name calling you.